You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So day one of jury deliberation is in the books. We have no verdict yet, but two things happened today that I think are especially important, and one of them might actually give us a clue as to what the jury is thinking right now. But first, just a note, I'll be going live as soon as the verdict is in, so if you want to hear the news as soon as it breaks, please make sure to subscribe. Okay, Glenn, the jury had a note for the judge asking for 4 items from Judge Merchan. That was 3 transcripts of testimony from David Pecker and 1 from Michael Cohen. Politico's Kyle Cheney tweeted, "Apply all the caveats here, but first instinct is that this is not welcome news for Trump. Prosecutors spent a lot of their lengthy close focusing on the value of Pecker's testimony. This is the roadmap they asked jurors to follow." So what are your thoughts on that?
You know, I agree with Kyle that my first instinct is because they've asked for evidence from a deeply damaging prosecution witness, indeed the first prosecution witness who testified at the trial, it's hard to envision how that would be a good jury note for Donald Trump. So it is likely to be a bad jury note. But here's the thing. I also agree with Kyle that we have to apply a whole bunch of caveats. So let's talk about that. You know, first of all, I tried countless cases in my 30 years as a prosecutor, and it is a bit of a fool's errand to try to unravel exactly what any one jury note actually means. Sometimes I had the benefit of talking to the jurors afterwards, particularly if they hung, and I would learn more about what the jury notes meant. So let me kind of talk through what some of the most likely scenarios are. First of all, it sounds like they may be going through evidence chronologically. David Pecker was the first witness, and yes, he was a deeply incriminating witness of Donald Trump because he was the one who set out for the jury the corrupt catch and kill scheme that they came up with to try to hide deeply damaging evidence. Why? So it wouldn't hurt Donald Trump's election chances. This was for Donald Trump's political advantage. So the fact that they're asking for information about some of the earliest testimony that they heard, I think is encouraging. It may mean that they're going to begin plowing through all of the witnesses chronologically. So maybe they're going to ask for Hope Hicks' testimony and Stormy Daniels' testimony and Westerhouse testimony, etc. It also may mean, and I have seen this pretty frequently, that they're looking at their notes because each juror was allowed to take notes. However, the jurors are told that their notes are not a substitute for the evidence because there's nothing guaranteeing that they took down word for word exactly what the testimony was. And they're also told that the notes are only for their own personal aid to assist their recollection as they work through their deliberations. What I've seen happen many times, Brian, is jurors will start not necessarily overtly comparing notes, but they'll start to talk about what David Pecker testified to. And one may say, well, you know what? I kind of remember it this way, and I'm referring to my notes. Another juror might say, oh, you know what? I remember it a little differently, so what do we want to do? Let's ask the judge to read back the testimony that we may, have some disagreement about. Here is the outlier, and I'm going to call it an outlier because we are way early in the deliberation game. They've only had it less than a day at this point. Sometimes when jurors are having a hard time reaching unanimity, particularly if there's kind of an extreme minority in the deliberation room, like it's an 11-1 verdict and you have one juror holding out for not guilty, for example, sometimes they will use transcripts to try to figuratively, beat that juror into submission. Say, wait a minute. Your doubt is not based on reason because remember, David Pecker said A, B, and C, and the juror might say, I don't remember it that way. Oh, really? Let's get the judge to read back the relevant portion of the testimony. Brian, all of these things are possibilities, but I think the one thing that we really need to guard against is reading too much into what any one juror note really means.
Okay, which is a great sign for a video that started with, what does this one juror note mean? Glenn, there was a bit of controversy that, of course, came in the form of some faux outrage from the right. I'm going to read a tweet from Fox's John Roberts, who is not to be confused with the Supreme Court Justice John Roberts, although at this point, what's the difference? So Roberts wrote, Judge Merchan just told the jury that they do not need unanimity to convict. 4 could agree on one crime, 4 could agree on another, and another 4 on another. He said he would treat 4-4-4 as a unanimous verdict. And of course, the right, clung on to that as evidence that the rules are being rigged and that suddenly the jury verdict doesn't need to be unanimous. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Glenn, but I'm assuming that John Roberts is being purposefully disingenuous here.
So, of course, the verdict needs to be unanimous. They will need to decide whether the evidence proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump caused business records to be falsified. Here is what he's talking about. Depending on the purpose for which the business records were being falsified, was it in part to violate election laws? Was it in part to violate campaign finance laws? Was it for some other reason? They don't need to necessarily reach unanimity on all of the underlying reasons. What they do need to find beyond a reasonable doubt is all of the elements that would satisfy the crime of falsifying business records in violation of New York state law. Let me give people what I hope is a more relatable example. Brian, let's assume that you and I decide we're going to burglarize a house and we pull a third co-conspirator into our plan to burglarize. Now, let me just explain. A burglary is when you enter somebody else's house without permission with the intent to commit a crime therein. So what really matters to prove somebody guilty of a burglary beyond a reasonable doubt is the moment we cross the threshold. That's the language that's used in the law. In other words, the minute we walk through a door without permission, the minute we climb through a window without permission, intending to commit a crime inside, we've committed the crime of burglary. And we have conspired. We've agreed to commit the crime of burglary. But Brian, once we get in there, maybe, you know what, you kind of want to steal some stuff. So you start filling your bag with loot. It's an old-time word that you don't hear enough of these days. Maybe I have a personal grudge against the homeowner, so I assault the homeowner. Maybe our friend, the third member of our conspiracy, is a pyromaniac and he decides to set fire to the house. Guess what? We have decided to commit lots of different crimes once we were in there. We may have crossed the threshold, walked through the door thinking, we're going to commit different crimes. Maybe when the three of us are caught, because I'll bet we'd make lousy criminals, and put on trial for conspiracy to burglarize, some of the jurors are like, oh, I think that they meant to rob or steal from the homeowner when they got it. Well, no. I think they really wanted to assault the homeowner. Well, no. I think they wanted to burn it down. So now you have a split among the jurors about what the precise underlying crime might have been. Guess what? They don't need to reach unanimity on the underlying crime. There's a similar principle at play here. It doesn't expose a legal infirmity. It actually exposes precisely how the criminal law works.
Okay, that's super helpful. And of course, puts on full display the extent to which John Roberts, who is a Fox anchor, would put this out with no further explanation, knowing how it would be interpreted by those on the right. And of course, it was interpreted exactly in that way, because this whole thing has been about perpetuating disinformation in a way that they think will benefit Donald Trump, or at least lends itself to these talking points that he's putting out there. Glenn, let's finish off with this. Is there anything that we can read from the tea leaves in terms of how long this deliberation might take based on what we saw today? Is there anything that I know people are going to see this and say, usually a quick verdict means a guilty verdict. So does that mean that's not in the cards right now? Can you give a little bit of an update on what we can expect just after day one?
That's a great question. I think today is the first data point we have on how long jury deliberations might take. Tomorrow will be a really important second data point. Here's why I say that. They asked for some transcripts, some testimony to be read back about the Trump Tower meeting between, Donald Trump and David Pecker and Michael Cohen, and kind of what that, what they wanted their memories refreshed about that for some reason or another. As I say, that's some of the most incriminating and important information because it has to do with the formation of the conspiracy. Tomorrow, Brian, if they start asking for transcripts about the second witness or the third witness or the fourth witness that testified, okay, that will begin to fill in some of the blanks. Maybe they're just going to methodically go through all of the witness testimony that they may have an open question about. One thing I can tell you, if they had asked today for Judge Merchan to read back to them some of defense witness Bob Costello's testimony, I think by all accounts that would have been an affirmatively bad juror note, at least bad in the interests of justice, because if they want to hear from really the only consequential defense witness that was presented by Team Trump, I actually maintain he was one of the best prosecution witnesses after we heard Bob Costello testify, but that would sort of put a whole nother gloss on what the jury might be doing in deliberations. So right now, I think we're still on track. I think the indicators are good on the balance with respect to these notes that were sent out today. but I do think tomorrow will probably tell us much more once a pattern emerges than we know right now just after the first handful of notes.
All right, so takeaway here, I think we have some good indicators, but as we mentioned before, all caveats apply. Don't look too deeply into what we're seeing right now, and hopefully we'll get a verdict here announced soon. So with that said, if you want to follow along as soon as we do get a verdict announced, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.